And welcome everyone to a March Madness Championship Week chat. I'm Andy Katz, pleased to be joined by Charles McClelland. Charles, during his day job, is the commissioner of the Southwestern Athletic Conference, and this year he's done an outstanding job putting together, leading, I should say, the men's basketball selection committee. And we've got a bracket coming on Sunday. We are communicating here on Friday with a couple of days before Selection Sunday. Charles, let's start off first. Where are we in terms of number of teams that are in the field?
Well, we are considering teams as we speak. There are a considerable number of teams that are in the field, Andy, and we have seeded lines 2, 3, and 4 on yesterday. We'll come back today, probably look at some additional teams as far as who gets into the field, and probably we'll look at some additional seed lines. So don't necessarily want to get in all of the specific numbers, but we are moving along at a very good pace.
When we first spoke, line 1 wasn't complete. There are teams still competing who could be on line 1. Where does line 1 stand?
Well, we've seeded line 1, but keep in mind we have the scrubbing process. So we'll do that multiple times throughout the course of the next 2 or 3 days. There are still a lot of games that are to be played. As those games are played, we get additional information. You know, there's been some talk about how valuable are the games in the tournament versus regular season. We look at the entire body of work, but if you still have an opportunity to put some additional points on your resume, we want to see that as well. So each seed line, 1 through 4, has been slotted with teams, but as those teams continue to play, we're going to look at those games, and if teams put additional resources out there for us to take advantage of, we're going to do that.
You know, when we go back to February 17th, you guys have always done a great job because there's been a high percentage of teams that were in that top 16 on February 17th that end up being there on Selection Sunday. I know you can't give me exact numbers because then we would know exactly who's in the top 16, but where are we in terms of, you know, how well you guys did then as opposed to, you know, you're in the ballpark here at closer to Selection Sunday?
Well, the one thing I would say about that, Andy, is this has been a very competitive season. There's been some really big wins, and then there's been some head-scratching losses, especially since that top 16 unveiled. If you recall that day, there was some upsets and some games that day that, you know, we had to take a look at. But I tell you, those teams have continued to become competitive, and there's been other teams that have definitely raised their overall profiles throughout, you know, those additional weeks. And I always want to continue to stress, we look at the entirety of the team. So when we did that on February 17th, that was as it was on February 17th. We're locked in a room here in Carmel, Indiana. I'm not quite sure if today is Thursday, Friday. I definitely don't know the date. I think it's the 15th of March. But as of today, we're looking at those teams' resumes, and we'll continue to do our good work.
So everyone loves to get hung up on Team X needs to get to the semi, to the final. But it has been stressed continuously, and it should be again, that who you play to get to that point in your tournament matters. So how much is the committee looking at Team X? You know, now they're suddenly in the semi or the final, but who did they play to get there? And where does that put them, you know, in the quad 1, quad 2, quad 3, and so on?
You know, great question. And we've always stated when we take a look at all of the teams, we look at who you play, where you play, and what, you know, the outcome of that game was. So any team that has the ability to be able to continue to build their resume, that's a positive. But we look at the entirety of the season. We look at all of the games. Games that are being played in the tournament are important, as well as the games that are being played in the regular season. So we will take a look at who you play, where you play, and what the outcome is. So if you're getting some quad 1 wins, that's going to help you. So each team that gets an opportunity, if you win, you get an additional opportunity. If you don't win, you just completed your resume, and we will evaluate the team based upon the resume.
You know, the one thing with this season, you were talking about how competitive it is. One thing I have found hard is that while there might be some elite teams, there's a lot of teams in the middle. I'm just curious, when we get to the 5, 6, 7, 8, or the 8, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, how hard will it be to move teams up and down a seed line when they're very similar, in those clusters, in those seed lines?
I think it's gonna take some additional discussion, but I can tell you, we've been watching, we've been evaluating, we've been talking long before we got here. So we do have an idea of where we are as far as that, process on those teams that you mentioned that are kind of competitive and bunched up in the middle. And that's part of the reason why we are watching games. We'll take some pause and we'll watch some critical games. There are some critical matchups that are going to come up that's going to have some, opportunities for teams to enhance themselves in this process. So I do think it's going to take some additional time because there are some very competitive teams that we're going to have to take a look at in that 5, 6, 7, 8 range. And I think we will take the time that is necessary in order to go through thoroughly and make sure that we make the best decision.
And one last thing on the back part of the seeding. Again, I think when you get into those teams that could be in Dayton, they're so competitive and they're, it's just going to be hard to differentiate. I know it's not normally 1v1. So if we can reinforce this again, what is the process for those last collection of teams of how the voting works to get to that last group?
Yeah, so theoretically, you're talking about teams that's on that 11 seed line. And, the media likes to say first 4 in and last 4 out. We don't necessarily look at it that way. We go through our principles and procedures. We go through our selections. And when we seed them, then those are the teams that will fall out on that 11th seed line. And our bracketing principles allow us to make those determinations, whether it's a Tuesday night game, Wednesday night game. But we'll go through our principles and procedures. And those teams that fall on that slot, those are the teams that will get the opportunity to go to Dayton.
And last thing, Charles, there's a ton of games, or there were certainly Thursday. There will be again Friday. Obviously, it shrinks on Saturday, and then finally a few on Sunday. What will Friday afternoon and evening look like?
Well, again, I think we will continue to look at putting teams in the field and seeding. We're definitely going to have to take some breaks. We took a break, obviously, yesterday because we had gone just about as far as we could go without seeing some of the results of some of these games. I anticipate that we're going to have some additional watching today. And I can tell you, we watch just as intense as we seed and select. So there's a lot that have gone into this season. These tournaments are extremely competitive, and we're going to have to take a pause and say, hey, let's watch several of these games because these games, again, could enhance some of these teams' resumes.
All right, long night ahead. It was a late night Thursday night with the Mountain West and the Big West and Pac-12 finishing really late. We're going to have more of the same on Friday. Appreciate your time, Charles.
No problem. And thank you for having me, Andy.